powerful. They can sense air pressure, wind direction, they can smell and taste with those antennae. It's pretty amazing what they can do with those. Also, their mouth parts. When you're identifying insects, mouth parts can be a really important piece to all of that. So that's one body part, the head. The next is the thorax, this is the middle section area. Now on the thorax, that's where you're going to see the wing attachment on most insects. Do these cockroaches have wings? No. So they're all, yes, that's a good point. So back there, what's your name? Dustin just said, these don't have wings, but there's other cockroaches that do, and that's right. And actually, most insects at one point in their evolution did have wings. They did evolve to have wings, and that's what kind of helped them to disperse and fill up so many different niches. Okay, so that thorax, can everyone say thorax? Thorax. Good, okay, and that's where the wings and the legs are attached. And then finally, the third body segment is this round part here, the abdomen, okay? So the abdomen is where you're gonna find its sexual organs, that's where the babies are gonna be made, developed inside of there. With the hissing cockroach, what they do, yeah, this is a hissing cockroach, so I don't know if we're really quite making this.
Do these live in the city actually?
No, these don't. So these are actually from Madagascar. So these are from the island of Madagascar. They can't really thrive around here. But what they do is once they breed, they'll have an egg sac develop inside of their abdomen that's really long, about that long. They will incubate the eggs just like a bird incubates her eggs and sits on the nest inside their body. And then about 24 hours before those babies are ready to hatch and emerge, the mother will lay that the egg sac, and about anywhere between 12 to 30 babies will come out of that sac within 24 hours. Okay, so one thing that's unique about insects, there's technically two major groups, although there's always exceptions to the rule. So you can see right here, I brought a few babies, see the little ones? See that? You see the little ones? And see, that's kind of a juvenile, middle-aged one. And where's that other big one? So this one and that one, those are about 1.5 years old. So in about another 6 months, these are going to be sexually mature enough to reproduce. It takes about 2 to 3 years for them to get to adult. But what you notice is the juveniles look like a younger version of the adult, right? They look like, so an adult, we're thinking of maturity, they can reproduce. So, good point, I almost lost this one. So, there's two types of life histories that insects have, typically. One is called hemimetabolous, or incomplete metamorphosis, and the other is complete metamorphosis, or holometabolous. So, there's other insects out there, right, that do something very different when they're younger. So what about butterflies and moths? So what do those look like in their juvenile stage? Shapeshifters. Yes. So the juveniles in that stage, you're going to see little larvae, caterpillars, that will then spin their cocoon, pupate, and then they emerge as a different adult. Now, oh, thank you. So what's interesting about that? So if you have shapeshifters that are little caterpillars as a juvenile, and then as adult they become winged flying insects, what might that mean about how it uses resources on the environment? How about what do they eat? Do they eat the same foods?
Wait, what's the question? What are we talking about?
If you have caterpillars as juveniles and then you have flying adults,
It just means that you might have different things.
so they eat different types of food. Now what about these guys? Are they competing for the same types of food? The juveniles? Yeah, they are, okay? So when you have these two different life cycles, it helps to talk about the different types of food that they're eating. So in a juvenile stage, for example, this big, beautiful hawk moth, as a juvenile caterpillar, it's a pest on your tomatoes and potatoes and tobacco plants. But as an adult, it can be a beneficial insect helping pollinate a lot of plants, okay? So insects are really interesting, and part of their life histories and where they fill out different niches across the environment is help to radiate the diversity that you see of all the species. Insects are the most diverse group of animals on the planet, okay? Okay, so let's go ahead. We'll put the cockroaches back here. Get a picture. Get your selfie with your cockroach. There we go. Sure. Okay, but everybody come up a little bit closer. Let's check out these insects a little bit here. So we've got samples, particularly I brought from my collection. So I collected all of these. These are from the Chiricahua Mountains in near Puerto, Arizona. It's near the Mexican border. It's one of the most rugged spaces in North America. The mountains, there's water, there's it's a hotspot of biodiversity here in North America. So you can see quite a range of just the Lepidoptera, that's the butterflies and moths, as well as some of the big beetles that you can find in that area of the world. It's a beautiful location, and because the landscape is so rugged, you get a lot of different niches that these animals can live and thrive in. Okay? So I'll talk a little bit about that later when you guys collect, but basically there's a process to it where you spread them on a cutting board after they're dead, after they're deceased, and you let them dry. And so that's what they'll hold that position. Now, I don't just go to collect, I collect because we're learning about these organisms, right? So a lot of these, we are following every few years. There's a group of lepidopterists like myself that go to different places around the world, and we collect to see what's out there. We find out what species are present. So if you don't know what's present, you don't know we're going to lose eventually. And as I will talk a little bit here about the aroga moth, you're going to learn that there's areas across North America where the habitat, the ranges are being reduced. And when that is reduced, what else gets reduced? The biodiversity, the other organisms in the environment. So insects can be really great because they're so sensitive to environmental changes. And that's what I'll talk more to you about, okay? So some other things about bugs, most of them, most of them are not harmful at all. There's a few that are, and they can be a major problem. But they also can be beneficial. And so when I say beneficial, what are you thinking about? Bees. Good. Bees. Okay, so what do bees do? Pollinate. Bees help with pollination. What else do they do? Ladybugs, honey. So products like honeycomb as well. Candles can be made out of wax. What about other products? So I raised some silk moths. For 5,000 years, humans have been farming silkworms or silk caterpillars to harvest for the cocoons that they create. So just like this cocoon, this is a North American silk moth. We can't really pull the threads out of this very well, the fiber out of this. But these Asian varieties are perfect for extracting the threads from there to create, to use the fiber for making cloth. 5,000 years humans have been doing that. So there's other products, byproducts that insects create too that are really important for us. Also, what else? Any other things that we're missing? So pollination, I heard ladybugs, beneficial, so interactions between predator and prey. What else? We got wax, honey, fiber.
Bird feed.
Bird feed. Who else do they feed? How about us? So actually 3 billion people, that's over a third of the population of the world, actually has insects in their diet as a regular source of protein, as well as other B vitamins. So if you do a little search, you may find that in North America, there's starting to be a trend. There's a lot of startup companies actually here in California that are starting to figure out ways to raise crickets and other consumable insects to actually grind into flour. People are raising crickets right now and can sell the flour for $40 a pound.
Don't they do that with like or like the flying larvae?
The larvae, yeah, the grubs, yeah, they sure do. Some people will go harvest them and they'll use them in a stir fry. So it's actually more unusual that we don't consume insects the way other people in the world do. Chocolate coats. That's the way to introduce them to Americans. Thank you. I've had Mormon crickets before as well as crickets. So Mormon crickets are an outbreaking insect, kind of like the aroga moth that I'll talk about, that has episodes of population fluctuations where it goes really high, just very high abundance. And actually the native peoples throughout the Great Basin used to collect them during the summertime as a major source of nutrition. Okay, and it also feeds other things. They also feed a lot of other organisms in the environment too. Sounds like yesterday we talked about trophic interactions. Okay. Okay, so do you guys have any questions? I just wanted to take a look at this. We have a box of beneficial insects. These are all from Utah. That's where I previously was at Utah State University. So it kind of shows a lot of diversity there versus here in Arizona. But any general questions before we go on to the presentation? Yes?
You have all of these?
Collecting. So I've done a lot of field work and research on insects. You'll see
You
it.
have to kill them.
Yeah, that's part of it. But you know, a lot of them have a quick turnover rate as well too.
Yeah.
So ultimately they do either get eaten by something else or they just die. Yes?
How do you collect the really small insects without damaging them?
Oh, that's a good question. So I'm going to show you guys after the talk some techniques. And we have what's called an aspirator, where it's this tiny little tube and you use like a straw to suck up like a vacuum, the little tiny insects. But that's a super important question because I'm going to talk about some of those tiny insects that are really important.
How do you kill them? Like the little ones, you know?
So there's different ways. The most humane ways are typically putting them in the freezer. Okay, so obviously.
Okay.
The other ways, there's a chemical called ethyl acetate. I brought some here today that is like a fumigant that will knock them out immediately
Is it
too.
easier to just put them in the freezer?
It depends on what you're doing. You know, if you're out in the field and you don't have a freezer, then you gotta do something else. It just depends on what you're doing.
Like, they just kind of grew up here.
No. So you actually need to pin them right away. Well, I actually posed them that way. So you can pose them that way. But the important thing is you have to do this right away because rigor mortis sets in. They have muscles just like we do. And when rigor mortis sets in, you can't move anymore. So you have to do this instantly. Did you have a question?
Yeah, why is it put them in the freezer?
Why? What was that? Put them in the freezer?
Yeah, why is that even?
Well, because just like us, it'll start to slow our temperature down and it'll gradually put them into a sleep. So they have a nervous system similar to ours. So it's more humane, it depends on perspective, right? Okay? So actually those are just name tags. So good question, I get that question a lot actually. So those are just the family name for those particular groups of insects. Okay? Okay, so let's go ahead and sit down. Did everybody get a
When you have, like, you can bring in somebody else that controls that population.
That's right, so that's one type of biological control.
Already, like, pesticides.
Pesticides, right? So one type of biological control is when you actually bring in a predator from a different environment and you release it into that environment. That's one type of biocontrol, very good. There's also other biological controls called conservation biological control. So this being a native insect in this environment, there was some documentation out there that said, well, there's other native natural enemies that interact in the system. So we wanted to particularly focus on those already existing enemies that are out there to see if we might be able to look out there at the landscape and think about how we can harness that interaction to try to suppress them all. And so particularly what we were looking at was a group called the parasitoids. Now I have to talk about parasitoids because they're my favorite group of insects. So parasitoids, does anyone happen to know what that is? A parasitoid.
A parasite.
Yes, kind of, but it's actually a whole other level of parasite. So it's parasite is related, but a parasitoid is a little bit more for the impact. So what happens is you have these tiny little moths or tiny little wasps that fly in the environment. We call them black mold. The mother will lay her baby on or inside of another insect, and that baby, it doesn't just weaken the host, it kills the host, okay? So that's what the difference is between a parasite that would just weaken, it ends it. So it will
Or any bug at all.
They have particular hosts that,
Like tarantulas, aquas?
so yeah, kind of, but they feed their prey to their young. So they actually provide food for their babies to eat right there. Yeah. So with these, the eggs actually lay on top of the host or inside of the host, okay? And then that baby will, kind of like aliens, come out, they'll eat the host. Pardon? Yes. Well, there was an old movie back, I don't know, a long time ago. Yeah, so the alien comes up with stomach, it's kind of like this. So we wanted to figure out how we might be able to observe across the landscape where the parasitoids were effective, but also do some experiments out there across the landscape to figure out what it is exactly, what factors out there do these parasitoids need in order to really be successful to control and manage that pest population. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Is that pretty good? Okay. So this was the study site. Pretty cool area here, Hennifer Echo Wildlife Management Unit. It's 5,700 hectares in northern Utah. This is really my playground for all those years. And what we did is we set up 1 acre plots, 38 plots across this landscape along an elevation gradient. And this particular area was managed to promote and support wildlife. This isn't always the case. There was also cattle raised on this property, but they were managed and rotated all throughout the area. So they wanted me to go in there and figure out how we can manage this lawn. And that was nice because sometimes there's other competing, as you guys are all learning about, there's competing interests out there, okay? So here is examples. I had at my fingertips different data sets. There was a data set from Alturas, California, up in Northern California, where there had been an aroga moth outbreak. There was an existing data set in Curlew Valley, Idaho, and this is the data set that I worked on at Hennifer Echo Wildlife Management Unit in northern Utah. And so I had that data so I could look at the climate patterns to understand what happened that way to see if there was some correlation with the climate that led to outbreaks. But I also wanted to look at these parasitoids. So there were these 3 major parasitoids in the system. And if you look at their ability to suppress the host, you can see in different locations that sometimes they 0% kill. In other locations, it would kill 85% of the population of insects out there. 85%, that's pretty effective. So instead of spraying and broadcasting pesticide, you have these little animals that are going out there specifically and finding a host. Here's a parasitoid right here, laying an egg inside the aerobic caterpillar. So that's tiny, you guys. This is 1 centimeter. That's the width of your pinky. Think of how small this is. It's tiny. And so what would happen, that's actually this particular parasitoid. This female would lay 1 egg. That egg would replicate 40 to 60 times inside of the body of this insect. And eventually, all of these little ones would pop out of it, killing the insect. Okay? So pretty brutal. But you have these parasitoids that are helping specifically control this moth. So if we look at all those 38, oh yes, question.
No fungi do that too?
Yes, so fungi is another biological control. So there's actually really good effectiveness on grasshopper management in the rangelands of using a fungicide that will basically spore up the bodies and take out the host.
How do they live in other infections?
Which ones? The parasitoids? So they're really good at smelling their host. So we'll talk a little bit about chemicals that are kind of in the air spaces that we would never detect. They can. And so they can pick up on where the host is located. They also, this is what's really amazing. So that little parasitoid right here that's found its host and is laying an egg, she'll take her antennae and beat the body of the host of this caterpillar to feel, basically give it a massage to see if there's any other eggs inside the body of that caterpillar. And if there's other eggs inside of there, she'll do 1 of 2 things. She'll either sting it with her stinger and kill it, or she'll go to another host. There's also interactions that happen between these different parasitoids inside of a host. So there's some that will actually lay their eggs inside of there, and the baby will eat the other species of parasitoids that's inside. crazy stuff. So it's this little micro world of all this interaction that's going on. And we think that we're kind of understanding things, but we're really just poking this little bit, and we get a little glimpse of the world.
Is the insect being affected like aware of what's going on? Like can they feel the
So let's go back to the fungicide question. So yes, they can sometimes detect this and actually modify their behavior to get rid of things. So the Mormon cricket, which they use extensively a fungicide to get rid of it in the same Great Basin, when it gets this particular type of spore on it, it's the type of fungicide or fungus, it senses it and it will bask in the sun to try to burn it off its body. And so the insects, it'll modify their behavior sometimes as well to try to get rid of it. They feel something's wrong. But I'm inside the insect brain, so I can't say what. But they definitely behaviors modify and change when this happens. Pretty interesting. Okay, so sometimes a natural thought would be, well, if there's a lot of aroga moths in the environment, well, that's a lot of food. So you're going to find a lot of parasitoids there. That might be a hypothesis that where there's a lot of moths, there's going to be a lot of parasitoids. When there's not a lot, there's not a lot of parasitoids. But that relationship we didn't really find. So that made us think that there must be other resources that are supporting these little wasps in the environment. What are those resources? What do we need? What does a parasitoid need? So parasitoids need two things. They need the protein that they get from their host, which would be the aroga moth and other possible insects. They also need nectar and pollen, just like bees. They also slurp up the sugary juice of the flower, and they can also get another source of protein from the pollen of the flower. And so what we did is, you can see all these little green dots across the landscape going up the elevation across these mountains. And we surveyed the insect, the flower community, everything at those sites for 13 to 16 weeks over the course of 5 years. During the entire growing season, every 3 to 4 days we were out there. So you really start to get to know that system really well, what's out there, what's its seasonality. We looked for different signals in the environment. And so what are some of those signals? Well, in the observations, what we found was this really strong tendency with elevation to find different species of parasitoid. So this one up here that lays its egg and multiplies a lot, it tended to be in the mid to higher elevations more abundantly. So here's basically the rate of parasitism was linked to abundance. And so it was more effective at higher elevations, as was this species, where this one had the opposite effect. You can see it was more effective at the lower elevations. And then when you saw all three of these species together with a higher diversity, you tend to see a higher result in suppression of the host caterpillar, okay? So that gave us some idea of where we could find these. We also found that the floral species out there was also strongly correlated with the landscape. And so we were starting to think, well, that's a resource for these wasps. Some of these wasps tend to be also where these flowers are. Let's do some experiments to figure out what they're using. So, as you can see, this is a strong relationship that appears to have increased as the species floral richness increased. Right here, you can see this tiny parasitoid. It's this one right here, this one. It's getting nectar from those flowers. So we set up some experiments. What better way to find out if these parasitoids are actually using the nectar than to spray sugar water out there? So we actually set up some plots. Our control was just a water spray. The experimental spray, we sprayed sugar to see if it could lure in parasitoids. Because we can get parasitoids to a location in a natural way. Hey, that's great. We don't have to spray any pesticides or chemicals. So we set up these experiments across the landscape, sprayed sugars in pots. We measured the insect response. And basically what we found was there wasn't a significant response for this particular parasitoid, but for this one, and as well as this other parasitoid, we saw them respond very strongly and significantly to the sugar versus just the water spray. So it gives you the idea that they might be using these resources. The next experiment that we did was, okay, well, not only are there flowers out there, how do these parasitoids find their host? That was a question someone asked earlier. Well, another way that these parasitoids find their host is when an insect is eating a plant and consuming it, the plant will send out a chemical signal. And it's like, the way I like to think about it is, help, somebody's eating me. You know, it literally, you can detect these chemicals in the space around the plant, a bunch of different chemicals. So you can think of it as, someone's eating me, come help, or you can also think that chemical, that there's other chemicals that are released that will call that insect that's eating the plant for more of them to come in. Like, I found a weak plant, come on, let's eat it. Because all plants have natural defenses as well for insect pests. And so we wanted to examine this a bit, and so we did another experiment looking at actual buckwheat flower plants that we grew in the greenhouse, as well as these mesets, methyl salicylate, the chemical that's released from the herbivores eating the plant. Oil of wintergreen, if you know what that smells like, that's the common name for it, so it smells like a wintergreen oil. We put those lures out there as well to see if those might lure in some of these parasitoids. And, you know, we had these different plots all across the landscape. We had different combinations. We had nothing there. We had just flowers there. We had flowers and the lure, the mesa lure, and then we had just the mesa lure. So by setting up this design, this experiment, we were able to see how these things would respond. And so sure enough, we had some interesting responses here. And basically what we found with this study is that here in the dark are the flowers. And this is just for these two pupal parasitoids. So if the flowers were present, we saw the parasitoids all respond. But what was different was that unlike Theogenes, Canura, when it smelled that lure, that herbivore-induced plant volatile, it would respond more strongly to that. And what also was interesting was we did see some tendency for it to respond more to where the host was more abundant. And so where flowers was very important and sensitive to this particular species, it was less as important to this other. Okay? And so that helped us get an idea, because if you remember in the beginning, we saw those different parasitoids spread out across the landscape in different ways. We saw these two tending to be in the mid to high elevation, where this one tended to be at lower elevations. And at the lower elevations, what was also important was that's where all the cattle troughs were. There was a lot of cattle troughs. There was a lot of other activity, like ATVs in there, and the flower resource was not as abundant in those areas. So, despite that disturbance, we still had this parasitoid species that was doing a decent job of controlling and managing that pest. Okay? And when we put the combined forces of these parasitoids together, all three of them being present, you saw a higher level of parasitism of the moth. And this can be very important because it doesn't always work that you put a bunch of things together, high diversity, different species, that you're going to have a higher level of suppression, that you kill off the moth more often. Sometimes these parasitoids can compete for that same resource. And when that happens, it actually can reduce the effectiveness overall. So what we found is that by looking and monitoring these different populations, we're able to see that parasitoids in this particular system are really important and a resilient way to help manage them. But we also saw that these little tiny insects use the resources very differently. So we need to think about the whole system and what's out there and available for these little creatures to survive and thrive. So certainly diversity in both the parasitoid as well as the flowers were important in this landscape. And just to kind of link this all back and conclude, we had these other data sets, and particularly if we were to control or compare the landscape, the way it looked like, the plant community looked like in Curlew Valley versus Conifer Echo, you see a very contrasting difference. This is what you see. Curlew Valley. You know how I talked about that invasive cheatgrass coming into a system? This is what it looks like. So after and before the defoliation event happened, it already was having a major encroachment of cheatgrass coming in. There wasn't a lot of other resources out in the environment like you saw at Jennifer Echo. And when you look at the level of parasitism that was taking care of the moth during those outbreaks, in this system, we saw less than 10% parasitism rate. In this system, you were seeing 60 to 85%. Okay? So you can see that all of these things interacting together were really important to help keep this system semi-stable. That's a very indicator of threat in space. Okay? So, you know, we were kind of laughing at this, that at least in the Curlew Valley, there's a lot of power in the flowers. So having that flower presence, it was able to be a resource for some of the important parasitoid species that were out there helping to manage and control the pest. Okay? So that's it. That is my presentation. Now, what I have, you know, does anybody have any questions? I'm sure you're more excited to get outside and do some of this yourself. But are there any general questions that you have? You've been a very good audience. There's just a lot that's happening out there that you don't always see. And so hopefully during the week at Range Camp, it'll kind of open your eyes a little bit more to all these small, tiny interactions that are happening that are really important. Okay? So for the next bit of time, just grab it right here. Oh, question? Yes.
So is that like
That's right. So the caterpillar is what's eating the sagebrush. And this little parasitoid baby